Hi, I'm Marie Doucette, and I'm here to do my presentation on E.B. White. He's an American writer. So, the information that I found out, I found so much information. I'm trying to kind of condense it, and I tried to kind of do a little bit different information than I put in my handout, although there is a little bit of crossover. He was born in New York on July 11th, 1899. His full name is Elwyn Brooks White, and he was called N by his family and friends as a child. He submitted his first, it wasn't his first work that he submitted, but he won his first literary prize for his submission in the Woman's Home Companion contest. At the age of 18, he went to Cornell University. At Cornell, his friends began calling him Andy, and throughout the rest of his life, most people called him Andy. After college, he traveled. He went as far as the West Coast, where he landed in Seattle for a while. He went to Alaska. He went on a cruise, and then he settled into a job as a writer at the New Yorker magazine, where he met and married a woman named Catherine. Catherine and Andy had a son they named Joel, and everybody calls him Joe. And he was born on December 21st of 1930. They bought a farm in Maine when Joe was a child, and they spent time like kind of back and forth throughout their lives between Maine and New York until finally settling in at the farm in Maine. The idea for Stuart Little, he actually dreamed up Stuart Little, and he wrote about half of it, and then he decided to write a children's book, and that's when Stuart Little was really born. In later editions of Stuart Little, one of the critiques that he had was that Stuart Little was born a mouse to a human family. So in later editions, he says that he arrived and not was born. The death of a pig on the farm led to the idea of Charlotte's Web because he really wanted to save the pig. And so that was his way of saving him. The spider in Charlotte's Web is an Arena Cavidica? I can't say it right. I'm sorry. But it's there for you to read. After 5 different beginnings, the actual beginning of Charlotte's Web was actually ready. He wrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it. I think he's kind of a writer like I am, where I reword things and reword them, come back to them. The Trumpet and the Swan was inspired by a story that he read in the New York Times about trumpeter swans. In 1977, his wife dies, and in October of 1985, E.B. White dies. There was a lot of other work that he did in between these times. He does a lot of research for his work, and he does a lot of other interesting things like build boats and stuff like that. So for my reading, I've decided to read an excerpt from Charlotte's Web. I'm going to start at the first chapter because I really like the way this story begins. I think that, of all of his intros that he started out with, that this is a really, really strong one. So it's called, Chapter 1, Before Breakfast. "Where's Papa going with that axe?" asked Fern to her mother as they were sitting on the table at the table for breakfast. "Out into the hog house," replied Miss Arable. "Some pigs were born last night." "I don't see why he needs an axe," continued Fern, who was only 8. "Well," said her mother, "one of the pigs is a runt. He's very small and weak, and it will never amount to anything. So your father has decided to do away with it." "Do away with it!" she shrieked. You mean kill it? Just because he's smaller than the others?" Miss Arable put the picture of Cream on the table. Don't yell, Fern, and your father is right. The pig will probably die anyway. Fern pushed her chair out, and away she ran. Outdoors, the grass was wet and the earth smelled like springtime. Fern's sneakers were sopped by the time she caught up with her father. Please don't kill it, she sobbed. It's unfair. Mr. Arable stopped walking. Fern, he said gently, you will have to learn to control yourself. Control myself? Yelled Fern. This is a matter of life and death, and you talk about controlling myself? Tears ran down her cheeks, and she took hold of the axe and tried to pull it out of her father's hands. Fern, says Mr. Arable, I know more about raising pigs than you do. A weakling makes trouble. Now run along. But it's unfair, cried Fern. The pig couldn't help himself, or help being born small, could it? If I had been born small, if I had been born very small at birth, would you have killed me? Mr. Arable smiled. Certainly not, he said, looking down at his daughter with love. But this is different. A little girl is one thing, a little runty pig is another. I see no difference, replied Fern, still hanging on to the axe. This is the most terrible case of injustice I have ever heard of. A queer look came over John Arable's face. He seemed almost ready to cry himself. All right, he said. You go on back to the house, and I will bring the rent when I come in. I'll let you start it on a bottle like a baby. Then you will see what trouble a pig can be. When Mr. Arable returned to the house half an hour later, he carried a carton under his arm. Fern was upstairs changing her sneakers. The kitchen table was set for breakfast, and the room smelled of coffee, bacon, damp plaster, and wood smoke from the stove. Put it on the chair, said Mrs. Arable to Mr. Arable. He set the carton down at Fern's place, where he walked to the sink and washed his hands and dried them on a roller towel. Fern came slowly down the stairs. Her eyes were red from crying, and she approached her chair. The carton wobbled, and there was a scratching noise. Fern looked at her father, then she lifted the lid to the carton. There inside, looked up at her, was a newborn pig. It was a white one. The morning light shone through its ears, turning them pink. He's yours, said Mr. Arable, saved from an untimely death, and may the good Lord forgive me for this foolishness. Fern couldn't take her eyes off the tiny pig. Oh, she whispered. Oh, look at him. He's absolutely perfect. She closed the carton carefully first and kissed her father, then kissed her mother. Then she opened the lid again, lifted the pig out, and held it against her cheek. At this moment her brother Avery came in the room. Avery was 10. He was heavily armed with an air rifle in one hand, a wooden dagger in the other. What's that? He demanded. What's Fern got? She's got a guest for the breakfast, said Miss Arable. Wash your hands and your face, Avery. Let's see it, said Avery, setting his gun down. You call that miserable thing a pig? That's a fine specimen for a pig. It's no bigger than a white rat. Wash up and eat your breakfast, Avery, said his mother. The school bus will be along in half an hour. Can I have a pig too, Pop? Said Avery. No, I only distribute pigs to early risers, said Mr. Arable. Fern was up at daylight, trying to rid the world of injustice. As a result, she now has a pig. A small one, to be sure, but nonetheless a pig. It just shows what can happen if a person gets out of bed promptly. Let's eat. But Fern couldn't eat until her pig had a drink of milk. Miss Arable found a baby's nursing bottle and a rubber nipple. She poured warm milk into the bottle, fitted the nipple over the top, and handed it to Fern. Give him his breakfast, she said. A moment later, Fern was seated on the floor in the corner of the kitchen, and her infant between her knees, teaching him to suck from the bottle. The pig, although tiny, had a good appetite and caught on quickly. The school bus honked from the road. Run, commanded Mrs. Arable, taking the pig from Fern and slipping a donut into her hand. Avery grabbed his gun and another donut. The children ran for the road and climbed onto the bus. Fern took no notice of others on the bus. She sat and stared out of the window, thinking what a blissful world it was and how lucky she was to have an entire charge of a pig. By the time the bus reached school, Fern had named her pet, selecting the most beautiful name she could think of. "Its name is Wilbur," she whispered to herself. She was still thinking about the pig when the teacher asked, "Fern, what's the capital of Pennsylvania?" "Wilbur," replied Fern dreamily. Though her pupils giggled, Fern blushed. So the activity that I've chosen to do with the kids is for the students to build their own spider webs. And the spider webs will be built using 4 popsicle sticks glued together with white yarn woven around them and a black pipe cleaner that's made a spider that they attach to it. Here are the references that I have for this PowerPoint presentation. Most of what I've shared with you is from the book Some Writer, The Story of E.B. White by Melissa Sweet. I thank you for listening and have a great day. Bye.